So here are 15 reasons why designing for an MMO is a living nightmare. Now, the first reason is because MMOs are designed to try to please everybody. You have PvP players, you have PvE players, you have people who like to play the auction house or the marketplace. You have people who like to compete and spike their adrenaline. You have people who kind of just want to, have a smooth, slow, enjoyable experience. And since there are so many different types of people who these MMOs are designed to please, what often ends up happening is the developers make a change to an aspect or a component of the MMO that makes some people happy while simultaneously displeasing and upsetting and alienating a different group of people. It's hard to please everybody. Now, the second thing that makes developing MMOs so difficult is something I like to call boyfriend-girlfriend syndrome. Now, what boyfriend-girlfriend syndrome is it's something I noticed when I was getting into my late teens and my early 20s, where some of my friends would get into relationships, and slowly but surely, bit by bit, they would start hanging out with the friend group less and less and less, until their boyfriend or their girlfriend was their primary and sole source of their, social life. And this is something you notice happening with MMOs as well, where MMOs become the sole means and the sole source of entertainment for MMO players. It puts the MMO in a situation where the expectations for it to continuously perform day in and day out are so much higher. The burden, the responsibility of keeping you entertained is that much higher. Now, the third reason why MMOs are so difficult to design for is because MMOs are expensive. There are often sub fees, microtransactions, expansion packs, etc., etc., etc. And since they're so expensive, the more people pay for something, the more they expect it to perform, the more expectations they have on that game. Now, the fourth reason why it's so difficult to design for an MMO is because of something called power creep. And because MMOs are games that are perpetually online, and they're perpetually online for years, what ends up happening is the players who are playing the games get more and more and more powerful. And as they're getting more and more powerful, the numbers that they're doing start to get ridiculous. You might be doing 17 million damage. You might have a 4,000 eye level. You might have 9,000 strength. And to kind of keep the game fun, what the developers will eventually have to do is do a stat squish, where they bring all those numbers back down to a reasonable range. Now, what happens when the developers do a stat squish is a lot of players will feel like they got weaker all of a sudden. All of their power was taken away, they got nerfed, and this is not something that feels great for players. And it's going to really upset players in the short term, but it's just something that has to happen to keep the game healthy in the long run. Now, the problem with stat squishes as well is the same problem you get with continuously resetting the power of players expansion after expansion or patch after patch, where you're playing a patch and you get super strong and then the next patch comes out and then you feel weak again. What ends up happening once you go through this cycle enough times is you start to notice the treadmill. You notice you're on a treadmill, and once you see the treadmill, you cannot get off the treadmill. You cannot unsee the treadmill. And this lowers the enjoyment of a lot of these games. Now, the fifth thing that makes MMOs a living nightmare to design is the fact that to keep the game fresh, the developers have to keep adding more and more and more content into the game. And when more and more content is being added into the game to please veteran players, what is simultaneously happening is the barrier to entry is continuously rising for newer players. If a new player comes into an MMO that's been developed for 10 years and there's just that much content, they could feel overwhelmed. They could feel like they don't know where to start. They could feel like there's too much to learn. So how do you solve that problem? It's a difficult one to solve. Now, the sixth reason why it's a living nightmare to design and develop an MMO is because of the problem you have with all online games nowadays. You have bots, you have real money trading, you have hackers and cheaters, and it often costs a lot of money for MMO developers to try to moderate this. And it's this constant cat and mouse game that they're playing, and it's not something that can even really be solved completely. Now, the seventh reason why it's so difficult and it's a living nightmare to design for MMOs is because the MMO player base is getting older. And as the MMO player base gets older, they have less time because they have more responsibilities. And the way that MMOs are designed, they're designed to be time consuming. That's what they're designed to do, to immerse you into a world, to get you connected to a character that's going to expect you to play for tons of hours, so you can kind of get that sense of achievement, of long-term achievement, of connection to the world, of connection to the character. The other issue with MMO players getting older is that MMOs are designed to be a deeply social experience. But as people get older, it becomes harder to make friends. People kind of become who they are. They get settled into their personality. They come home tired after a long day from work, and they're not always up to be giggity and to be super social and bubbly. And so this creates another issue with the fact that MMO players are getting older. Now, the eighth reason why it's a living nightmare to develop an MMO is a lot of players who are attracted to MMOs are terminally online people. And the thing with terminally online people is they tend to make mountains out of molehills. So a new patch can come out with some nerfs and buffs and they're freaking out over it, or some change can happen to the game and it's the absolute end of the world for people. Because what often happens with people who are terminally online is they lose some perspective. And so because MMOs are often a second life simulator, a life simulator, and because they are so demanding on one's time, it attracts some people who are online all of the time. And these people are typically very hard to please because they kind of lack some perspective. Now, the ninth reason why it's a living nightmare to design for MMOs is because it's already so difficult to balance a game that isn't an MMO. But MMOs are particularly hard to balance because you constantly have to make changes to the classes. You constantly have to make changes to the jobs to keep them fresh. You're constantly adding new classes or new jobs to keep the game fresh. And what ends up happening now with the modern internet is players will start running simulations and they'll start, getting really data driven and seeing truly how balanced the game really is. So the developers are really under a lot of scrutiny if their game is not balanced, and it's very difficult to actually balance a game, especially when it's constantly changing. Now, the 10th reason why it's a living nightmare to design for an MMO is because of the snowball effect. Let's say your MMO has a decent population, but it starts dropping a little bit. Since it's an MMO, a game that is massively multiplayer and online, people want to play with a lot of other people. So if it gets out that some people are leaving the game, that some people are quitting the game, this can start quickly snowballing to a situation where more and more people are doing it. And then when more and more people do it, you get the feeling that the game is dying. And so then more people jump ship. And before you know it, your ship is empty. And this is something that every MMO developer has to kind of deal with and figure out. So the 11th reason why it's so difficult to design for an MMO is because of unexpected developments to technology. So back in 2004, when World of Warcraft was coming out, the developers made a design choice to make it possible to run add-ons in the game. And they thought this was fine. And it was fine for 2004 because add-ons in 2004 were descriptive and they barely changed how the game is played. Now, if you compare that to how add-ons are in 2023, they're a lot more calculative. And oftentimes they change the fundamental way that the game is played, fundamentally. And so now the developers of World of Warcraft are trying to design around these add-ons, and it's an absolute disaster. Now, the 12th reason why it's so difficult to design for MMOs is because of shorter attention spans. In general, we live in the TikTok generation, we live in the Shorts generation, and MMOs are designed to be a slow burn. They're designed to be something that you enjoy slowly and over time. And it's a bit more of a romance and a lot less like a hookup where there is excitement and there is anticipation. And you're not always having a high moment all the time, but you do have this long-term connection with the game, this long-term romance with the game. And when that's the case, if you are someone who has become addicted to really quick dopamine hits, it becomes a lot harder to have the patience to enjoy an experience like what an MMO is designed to be. Now, the 13th reason why it's so difficult to design for an MMO is because MMOs have massive competition. Now, there's competition within MMOs. You have more and more of them coming out. You have Lost Ark, New World, World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy, RuneScape, Old School RuneScape. There's a ton of MMOs to choose from, but not only that, but there's a ton more media to choose from in general. Now we have Netflix. Now we have all these movies coming out, all these shows coming out. And so there is this constant, and indie games, there are a ton of indie games coming out. And so the competition for an individual's entertainment time, for their free time, is getting fiercer and fiercer and fiercer. Now, the 14th reason why it's so difficult to design for an MMO is because it's a huge financial risk. It costs a ton of money to make an MMO. You have to make a game that has servers, that is constantly online, that is constantly getting updates, that is constantly changing and being updated, that is meant to hold a ton of people, and that is going to have to deal with real money trading and hackers, and you're going to have to play the cat and mouse game with them, and that costs money. So they're a huge financial risk. And since they're a huge financial risk, oftentimes developers run into a situation where they can get tempted to put in microtransactions and put in a lot of pay to win elements just so some of that risk is alleviated. Now, also, you have the problem of a lot of gamers expecting more and more and more for less and less money. You have Fortnite, you have a ton of these games that are coming out, a ton of these MMOs that are coming out that are free, and people play free games. And so, if there are free options, it makes it harder to compete unless your game is also free. And the only way you're going to make money if your game is also free is to put in microtransactions. And it's this horrible situation that MMOs are now in. Now, the last and final reason why MMOs are so difficult to design for in 2023 is because of social media. Back when MMOs were fresh, back when they were new, it was novel. The idea of going out there and meeting new people and interacting with new people who might live from anywhere around the world. That was new, that was fresh. Nowadays, if people want to talk online, it's not novel anymore. It's not new. It's not a, exciting experience. Not only that, but people have more options to go ahead and engage with the exact type of people they want to engage with and have the exact conversations they want to have. Whereas in an MMO, you don't really have that sort of selective choice.